The wind, sharp as a freshly whetted knife, whipped Alara's threadbare shawl tighter around her, offering little solace against the biting chill of the high desert morning or the colder dread icing her veins. Before her, the auctioneer, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer of avarice, gestured with a stained hand towards the makeshift platform where she stood. Her bare feet, blue with cold, were numb on the rough-hewn planks. The bulge of her belly beneath the thin cotton of her dress was starkly, shamefully, apparent. "All right, gentlemen, settle down, barked Jedediah Grimshaw, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. "Next up, a bit of a special case, this one. Woman, name of Alara. Comes with, well, you can see for yourselves, comes with a burden or a bonus, depending on your needs in a few months' time." A low, crude chuckle rippled through the assembled crowd of hard-faced men miners, down on their luck drifters, a few grim-looking homesteaders. "She's young, still strong enough for light chores, cleaning, mending. What am I bid for this asset?" Alara squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping to trace a path through the grime on her cheek. Asset. Burden. Not a person, not a woman carrying a child, but a thing to be bought and sold. The humiliation was a physical ache, pressing down on her, stealing the very air from her lungs. This dusty, forgotten corner of redemption, a town that seemed to mock its own name, was the end of her road, the final degradation after months of flight and fear. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The bidding started low, insultingly so. $5 for the girl and her troubles. One man cackled, his teeth stained yellow. $7, another called, eyeing her with a look that made her skin crawl. Each bid was a fresh lash, each assessing gaze a violation. She tried to retreat into herself, to build walls around the flickering ember of her spirit, to protect the tiny, innocent life within her from the ugliness of this world. She was a vessel of despair, adrift on a sea of hostile faces, the precious cargo of her unborn child, her only reason to endure. This was it, the absolute nadir. There was nowhere lower to fall. Then, a new voice, calm and resonant, cut through the auctioneer's patter and the coarse jeers of the crowd. $100. A hush fell. Heads turned. Alara's eyes snapped open, drawn by the unexpected authority in that tone. Standing near the edge of the assembly, slightly apart from the others, was a man she hadn't noticed before. He was tall, his frame lean but powerful beneath a well-cut leather vest and dusty denims. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see the firm line of his jaw, the way he held himself with an air of quiet command. He wasn't one of the usual redemption rabble. There was a substance to him, an aura of prosperity and self-assurance that set him starkly apart. Grimshaw's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise, then greed, replacing his usual sneer. $100 from the gentleman in the back. A fine bid, sir, a fine bid. Do I hear 110? Silence. The other bidders seemed to shrink back, intimidated or simply outclassed. The tall man didn't move, didn't speak, just held his ground, his unseen gaze seemingly fixed on her. 100 going once, going twice. Grimshaw's voice rose, eager to seal this unexpectedly lucrative deal. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Who was this man? Why such a sum for her, a pregnant, destitute woman? Was his interest more sinister than the others, simply better funded? Fear, sharp and cold, warred with a desperate, treacherous flicker of hope. Then the man spoke again, his voice carrying easily over the sudden quiet. I recognize her, just 3 words, spoken with a quiet certainty that brooked no argument. He took a step forward, and for the first time, the angle of the sun caught his face beneath the brim of his hat. Alara saw a pair of startlingly direct, gray eyes, a face weathered by sun and wind but marked by an intelligence and a severity that was not unkind. And in those eyes, she saw something. Not pity, not lust, but a spark of recognition? Couldn't be. No one knew her here. No one could know her. Before she could process the impossible, he raised his hand slightly. $500, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. A simple declaration of fact. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Grimshaw's jaw dropped. $500 was a fortune, more than most of these men saw in a year. And I'll take her now. His life, and hers, had just veered onto an unexpected, perilous path. The journey from the crude auction block in Redemption to the man's sprawling ranch was undertaken in a haze of disbelief and trepidation for Alara. His name, she learned from the curt instructions he gave to a young lad to fetch his wagon, was Ethan McCabe. The name meant nothing to her, yet his claim of recognition echoed in her mind, a dissonant chord in the cacophony of her fears. He had handled the transaction with Grimshaw with a brisk, no-nonsense efficiency, his money silencing any further questions or comments from the auctioneer. Ethan McCabe was clearly a man of means. The wagon was sturdy, the horses well-groomed and spirited. He himself, though dressed for the trail, wore clothes of good quality, his boots expensive, his demeanor one of ingrained authority. He hadn't spoken a word to her since his shocking bid, merely gestured for her to climb into the wagon bed, which he'd had one of his men line with a thick blanket. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy as the dust that rose from the wagon wheels. Alara huddled in the corner, pulling the blanket around her, though the sun was now climbing, warming the air. She stole glances at his broad back as he drove. What did he want with her? The price he'd paid was exorbitant, nonsensical. He could have hired any number of women for honest work for a fraction of that cost. The thought that his intentions were dishonorable was a cold stone in her stomach. Yet his manner thus far had been impersonal, almost detached. She thought of her past, a life that seemed a distant, shattered dream. Born Alara Vance, daughter of a struggling but respectable shopkeeper in a green valley far to the east. She'd married young, for love, to a kind, gentle man named Thomas. They'd had plans, hopes. Then Thomas had taken ill, a swift, brutal fever that had stolen him from her, leaving her widowed and, as she soon discovered, pregnant. Thomas's family, particularly his grasping older brother Silas, had seen her not as a grieving widow but as a liability. Silas had systematically stripped her of what little she and Thomas had owned, claiming debts, producing false ledgers. When she'd resisted, he'd turned cruel, his whispers poisoning the town against her. He'd implied her pregnancy was not Thomas's, that she was a woman of loose morals, left destitute and ostracized, with Silas threatening to have her committed to an asylum or sold into indenture. She had fled, carrying only a few meager possessions and the growing life within her. The flight had been a nightmare of dwindling funds, hunger, and constant fear, culminating in her capture by men who preyed on the vulnerable, and her subsequent delivery to the auction block in Redemption. Ethan McCabe's ranch, the Maverick, as the brand on the gatepost proclaimed, was miles from Redemption, nestled in a wide, fertile valley protected by a ring of low, purple hills. It was vast, impressive. Fields stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle. The main house, when they finally reached it, was a large, two-story timber structure, sturdy and well-maintained, if a little austere. It spoke of prosperity, of hard work and success. As Ethan reined in the horses, a couple of ranch hands emerged from a nearby barn, their expressions curious as they took in Alara. Ethan's gaze swept over them, and whatever they might have been thinking, they kept to themselves, touching their hat brims respectfully. "Unload the supplies, Ben," Ethan said to one. "Jed, see to the horses." He then turned and, for the first time, addressed Alara directly, his voice low and even. "Come down," he offered no hand, just waited. As she stood before him, the dust of the journey coating her, her belly a prominent swell, she saw the townsfolk's scornful looks mirrored, albeit more subtly, in the glances of the ranch hands. "Look at him, buying damaged goods," she'd heard one woman mutter back in redemption as Ethan led her away. "Wonder what he wants with her," another had whispered, heavy with insinuation. The shame burned fresh. Ethan led her towards the house. The interior was spacious, furnished with solid, practical pieces. It was clean but lacked a woman's touch. A distinct air of bachelorhood pervaded the rooms. He led her up a wide staircase to a sunny room at the back of the house. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A clean towel and a fresh bar of soap were laid out. "This will be your room," he said, his gray eyes sweeping over her, an unreadable expression within them. "Rest. There's food downstairs when you're hungry. The cook's name is Maria. She'll see to your needs." Alara clutched her hands together, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. McCabe, why? Why did you?" She couldn't bring herself to say, "By me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, conflict, perhaps, or a deep, buried memory. "We'll talk later, Alara," he said, using her name, and the sound of it, so unexpected from his lips, sent a strange shiver through her. "Get some rest. You look like you're about to fall over with that." He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. She stood there, trembling, torn between an overwhelming weariness and 1,000 frantic questions. He knew her name. He'd said he recognized her. But how? From where? Her past was a landscape of pain she'd tried to outrun. To think it had followed her here to this man was terrifying. Yet, there was a measure of safety in his quiet command, in the solid walls of this house. For now, she was out of Grimshaw's clutches, away from the leering eyes of the auction crowd. She was still a captive, in a way, her fate entirely in Ethan McCabe's hands, but the nature of that captivity felt different. The initial awkwardness of her arrival, her profound fear, and Ethan's gruff, almost impersonal provision for her safety, hinted at the long, uncertain emotional journey that lay ahead. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the exhaustion finally claiming her, and wept. Several days passed in a strange, suspended state. Alara mostly kept to her room, venturing down only for meals, which she ate in the large, echoing kitchen with the ranch cook, Maria. Maria was a stout, middle-aged Mexican woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She asked no questions, simply provided Alara with food and ensured she had what she needed, her manner conveying a quiet sympathy that Alara found more comforting than any words. Ethan McCabe was a largely absent presence. She would hear his boots on the stairs early in the morning and late in the evening. Occasionally, their paths would cross in the hallway or on the porch. He would nod, his expression unreadable, and continue on his way. The silence between them remained, a vast, uncharted territory. Alara, though still deeply wary, began to feel a sliver of her strength returning. The regular food, the warmth of the house, the absence of immediate threat, allowed her body and mind a much-needed respite. But the idleness chafed at her. She was not used to being kept, to doing nothing. Her sense of obligation, and a desperate need to prove she was not merely a burden, grew with each passing day. One afternoon, finding a pile of mending in a basket in the kitchen, work shirts belonging to the ranch hands, Maria's aprons, she picked up a needle and thread. Her mother had taught her to sew well, a skill she'd once taken for granted. She was engrossed in repairing a particularly torn shirt when a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room tilted. The needle slipped from her numb fingers. She pressed a hand to her forehead, a low moan escaping her lips. The baby chose that moment to give a particularly vigorous kick, as if protesting her exertion. She swayed, reaching out for the table to steady herself, but her legs buckled. She crumpled to the floor, the mending basket scattering around her. It was Ethan who found her. He'd come into the kitchen seeking Maria, a question about livestock feed on his lips. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes taking in the scene. Alara, pale and unconscious on the floor, the scattered shirts, the needle glinting innocently nearby. For a moment, he simply stared, a strange expression crossing his face, a fleeting glimpse of something that looked like fear, quickly masked. Then he was moving, crossing the kitchen in 3 long strides. He knelt beside her, his touch surprisingly gentle as he checked her pulse, then brushed the hair back from her clammy forehead. "Alara?" he said, his voice low, a note of urgency in it. Her eyelids fluttered. She was so pale, so fragile-looking, a stark contrast to the memory he held of her. A vibrant young woman, full of life and laughter, from a time he thought he'd long buried. Seeing her like this, so vulnerable, something shifted within him. His impulsive purchase at the auction had been driven by a complex mix of shock, a sense of outraged justice, and that startling, unwelcome jolt of recognition. Now, seeing her helplessness, a deeper, more protective instinct stirred. This wasn't just about righting a wrong or satisfying a ghost from his past. This was about her, the woman lying broken at his feet. He carefully scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp against his chest. He carried her upstairs to her room, his mind racing. He'd intended to give her space, to let her recover, to decide how or if he would ever voice the connection he felt, the memories she unknowingly stirred. But this changed things. He laid her gently on the bed, then went in search of Maria. He found her in the pantry, her usual calm briefly deserting her when Ethan explained what had happened. Together they tended to Alara. Maria bathed her face with cool water, murmuring soothing words in Spanish, while Ethan stood by, feeling uncharacteristically helpless. When Alara finally regained full consciousness, she found Maria fussing over her and Ethan McCabe standing near the window, his back to her, staring out at the rolling plains. What happened?" Alara whispered, her voice weak. "You fainted, child," Maria said softly, patting her hand. "You pushed yourself too hard. You must rest. For the little one, eh?" Alara's gaze drifted to Ethan's still figure. He hadn't turned, hadn't spoken. She felt a flush of shame. She tried to be useful, and instead, she'd caused more trouble. Later, after Maria had brought her some broth and insisted she stay in bed, one of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Billy, let his curiosity get the better of his manners. He'd been sent to fetch something from the main house and, seeing Ethan on the porch, blurted out, "Mr. McCabe, sir, is that woman? Is she gonna be all right? Heard she took a bad turn. Some of the boys are saying, well, they're wondering why she's here, sir." Ethan's eyes, normally a cool gray, hardened to chips of granite. He turned slowly to face Billy, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. "That woman, Billy, is under my protection. Her well-being and her reasons for being here are my concern and mine alone. Anyone on this ranch who shows her anything less than complete respect will answer directly to me. Is that understood?" Billy, thoroughly cowed, stammered, "Why yes, sir, Mr. McCabe. Perfectly, sir." He practically fled. Alara, whose room overlooked that section of the porch, had heard the exchange through her open window. Ethan's defense of her, so unequivocal and stern, sent a warmth spreading through her chest, a tiny, fragile seed of trust taking root in the barren soil of her fear. He hadn't just bought her, he was actively shielding her. The reasons remained a mystery, but the reality of his protection was becoming undeniable. The days following Alara's collapse settled into a new rhythm. Ethan, gruffly but firmly, forbade her from attempting any strenuous tasks. Maria, equally firm, ensured Alara ate well and rested, though she did allow her to engage in light activities like shelling peas on the porch or folding linens, tasks that Alara insisted upon to maintain a sense of purpose. Shared meals became a quiet ritual. Ethan, Alara, and Maria would eat together in the large kitchen. Initially, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery. Ethan, Alara knew, often ate with his foreman or alone in his study, so his consistent presence at the kitchen table was a change. Slowly, tentatively, conversation began to surface. Maria would chat about the garden or the antics of the ranch dogs. Ethan would occasionally make a comment about the weather or the price of cattle, his remarks usually addressed to Maria, but Alara felt included in the periphery of their exchange. She learned, through Maria's affectionate grumbling, that Ethan had built the Maverick from practically nothing. He'd arrived in the valley years ago with little more than a strong back and a fierce determination. He'd worked hard, saved harder, and bought land piece by piece, transforming it into the thriving enterprise it was today. He was respected, even feared by some, for his shrewdness in business and his unwavering sense of justice. There was no mention of a wife or any family. He seemed a solitary man, wedded to his land and his work. Alara, in turn, began to tentatively contribute more than just her presence. One evening, Maria confessed to a longing for the kind of sweet cornbread her own mother used to make. Alara, remembering a recipe her mother had cherished, shyly offered to try her hand at it. The next day, with Maria's assistance, she baked a pan of golden, fragrant cornbread. At dinner that evening, Ethan took a bite, then another. He paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is good, Alara," he said, his gaze meeting hers directly for a moment. "Very good." The simple praise warmed her more than she would have thought possible. It was a small thing, yet it felt significant, a tiny bridge built across the chasm of their unspoken circumstances. After that, she found herself taking on more of the cooking, her skills in the kitchen, honed by necessity and a natural aptitude, proving a welcome addition. Maria, whose talents lay more in robust ranch fare than delicate baking, was happy to delegate. Quiet evenings found them in the main living room. A fire usually crackled in the large stone hearth. Alara would sit in a worn armchair, mending Ethan's shirts, a task she'd quietly resumed, and which he no longer protested, or sometimes, if Maria could find one, reading an old newspaper or a battered novel. Ethan would often be at his large desk in the corner, poring over ledgers and ranch accounts, the scratch of his pen a familiar sound. The silence between them was no longer awkward or heavy with unspoken questions. It had become a comfortable quiet, a shared space where two solitary people existed in a fragile, unspoken truce. One afternoon, as Alara sat on the porch swing, a basket of beans in her lap, Ethan approached. He didn't speak for a moment, just leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the vast expanse of his land. "The valley is beautiful this time of year," Alara said softly, breaking the silence. He nodded. "It's good land." Demanding but fair, he paused, then turned slightly towards her. "My foreman, Tom, is taking a wagon into Redemption tomorrow for supplies. Is there anything you need?" The mention of Redemption sent a shiver of unease through her. "No, thank you, Mr. McCabe. I have everything I need." He looked at her then, his gray eyes searching her face. "Ethan," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My name is Ethan." She met his gaze, a slight flush rising on her cheeks. "Ethan," she repeated softly, felt strange on her tongue, yet also right. He gave a curt nod, then pushed himself off the railing. "Just let Tom or Maria know if you think of anything," he hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then seemed to think better of it and strode off towards the barns. Alara watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. His quiet insistence on her using his first name felt like another small step, another layer of formality stripped away. She was beginning to see the man behind the stern exterior, the rich cowboy who had plucked her from despair. He was a man of few words, but his actions are the provision of safety, the quiet respect he was beginning to show her, his defense of her to his men, spoke volumes. Yet the central mystery remained, his recognition of her. She'd searched her memory countless times, trying to place his face, his name, but found nothing. Her past before Thomas was a blur of childhood in a small town. Her life with Thomas had been insular, focused on their small home and his work. After his death, her world had shrunk to a desperate flight. Where could Ethan McCabe have possibly known her from? The question gnawed at her, a constant undercurrent to the fragile peace she was beginning to find. Her pregnancy was progressing. The baby was more active now, its movements a constant reminder of the new life she carried. A life that was now, in some indefinable way, tied to Ethan McCabe and the Maverick. One evening, as she sat reading by the fire, a particularly strong kick made her gasp and press a hand to her belly. Ethan, looking up from his ledgers, saw her expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked, a rare note of concern in his voice. She managed a small smile.
"No.
"Just the baby. Saying hello, I think." He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on her hand resting on her swollen abdomen. Then, hesitantly, he rose and walked over to her chair. He stood before her, an awkwardness about him she hadn't seen before. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough, gesturing almost imperceptibly towards her belly. Alara's breath caught. His request was so unexpected, so intimate. She hesitated for only a second, then nodded, her heart pounding. He knelt slowly before her chair, his large, calloused hand reaching out. He laid it gently, tentatively on her stomach, just where she'd indicated the movement. His touch was surprisingly warm, steady. They waited in silence. Then the baby gave another distinct kick, right beneath his palm. Ethan's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered across his face. He didn't pull his hand away, just kept it there, feeling the faint, fluttering movements. For Alara, the moment was transformative. His touch, so unexpected, so respectful, seemed to acknowledge not just her, but the child she carried, as real as worthy. It was a moment of profound, unspoken connection, a fragile bridge built in the firelight. He finally drew his hand back. His expression shuddered once more, but something had changed. He rose and returned to his desk, but the scratching of his pen did not resume for a long time. Alara, her own heart still thudding, pretended to read, but the words on the page were a blur. The fragile piece, however, was not destined to last. Several weeks later, a letter arrived for Ethan, bearing the postmark of a town several days' ride east. The town from which Alara had fled, the town where Silas, her cruel brother-in-law, still resided. Ethan read it in his study, his face growing grimmer with each line. Later that day he sought Alara out. She was in the small garden Maria kept behind the kitchen, weeding a patch of herbs. He stood watching her for a moment, his expression troubled. "Alara," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I need to talk to you." She rose, wiping her hands on her apron, a sense of foreboding prickling her skin. He led her to the porch, to the same swing where they'd had their brief conversation weeks before. He didn't sit, but stood before her, the letter crumpled in his hand. "This is from a man named Silas Blackwood," he began, his eyes fixed on her face. Alara felt the blood drain from her cheeks. Silas. The name alone was enough to bring back a flood of terrifying memories. My late husband's brother," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded grimly. "It seems Mr. Blackwood has learned of your whereabouts." He claims you absconded with property belonging to him, that you are a debtor. He makes certain demands. Ethan's voice was tight with controlled anger. He implies that if his demands are not met, he will cause trouble. For you. And for me. For harboring you. Alara stared at him, horror-stricken. Silas had found her. The fragile sanctuary she had found at the Maverick was about to be shattered. The thought of Ethan being dragged into her troubles, of his reputation being tarnished because of her, was unbearable. He wants money, doesn't he? She asked, her voice flat with despair. Or he wants me back. To sell me again. Properly this time. Ethan's jaw tightened. He mentions a sum of money. A significant sum. And yes, he implies he has a prior claim on your indenture. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She had been so foolish to hope, to dream of safety. Silas would never let her go. He was like a bloodhound, relentless and cruel. I should leave, she stammered, a sob catching in her throat. I can't let him. I won't bring this down on you, Ethan. You've been too kind. She made to rise. A desperate urge to flee, to disappear again, consuming her. Ethan's hand shot out, gently but firmly grasping her arm. You're not going anywhere, Alara. His voice was low, but it held an iron resolve that surprised her. This is your home now, and Silas Blackwood will not set foot on this ranch. Nor will he lay a hand on you, as long as I draw breath. She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears, stunned by the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. But, your reputation, the town. Damn the town, he said, his voice rough. And damn Silas Blackwood. This isn't just about him, Alara. This is about what's right. He paused. Then his voice softened slightly. I told you I recognized you. Her breath hitched. This was it. The moment she had dreaded and, in a strange way, longed for. He let go of her arm and walked to the porch railing, staring out at the land, much as he had done before. It was a long time ago, he began, his voice distant, tinged with a sadness she hadn't heard before. Before I came to this valley, I was younger, working on a freight line that passed through a small town called Oakhaven. Your father, Samuel Vance, owned the general store there. Alara gasped. Oakhaven. Her father. You knew my father. Ethan nodded. He was a good man. Fair, honest. Always had a kind word. And he had a daughter. A girl with bright eyes and a laugh like wind chimes. She used to help him in the store sometimes. She was spirited. Kind. He turned to look at her, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Her name was Alara. The recognition. It wasn't just her name he'd known at the auction. It was her. Or rather, the memory of the girl she had once been, before life had battered her, before Thomas, before Silas, before the desperation and the fear. I don't remember you, she whispered, ashamed. There's no reason you should, Ethan said gently. I was just a young drifter, passing through. But I remembered you, Alara. I remembered your father's kindness, and your spirit. When I heard some years later that Samuel Vance had passed, and then later still, vague rumors that his daughter, married to a Thomas Blackwood, had fallen on hard times after his death. Well, I didn't know the details. Didn't know how bad it was. He looked away again, his voice hardening. When I saw you on that block in Redemption, looking like a hunted animal, when I heard your name, it was like being punched in the gut. To think that the daughter of Samuel Vance, that bright, spirited girl, could end up like that. His jaw clenched. Silas Blackwood. I've heard of him. He has a reputation that stretches far, and none of it good. What he did to you, it was an abomination. Alara was speechless, tears streaming down her face now. But they were no longer tears of fear alone. There was relief, a profound, aching understanding. His actions, his quiet protection, his inexplicable kindness. It all made a terrible, poignant sense. He hadn't bought a stranger. He'd rescued a memory, a connection to a past he'd thought honorable. "I won't let him hurt you, Alara," Ethan said again, his voice softer now, but no less resolute. "We'll face him. Together." The threat from Silas Blackwood hung over the maverick like a gathering storm. Alara, though terrified, found a strange strength in Ethan's quiet determination and the revelation of their shared past, however tenuous. The knowledge that he hadn't acted out of mere pity, but from a deeper, older connection, forged a new bond between them. She was no longer just an auctioned woman he'd taken in. She was Alara Vance, Samuel Vance's daughter, a person he had known, however briefly, in a brighter time. Ethan, for his part, found himself increasingly entangled in Alara's fate, far beyond what he'd initially anticipated. His initial impulse had been one of righteous anger and a sense of duty to a memory. Now, living under the same roof, sharing quiet moments, seeing her resilience and gentle nature reemerge from beneath layers of fear and hardship, his feelings were becoming more complex, more personal. He admired her quiet strength, her determination to contribute despite her condition, her unwavering love for the child she carried. He found himself thinking of her not as a responsibility, but as Alara, the woman. The thought was both unsettling and undeniably present. He began to make discreet inquiries about Silas Blackwood, using his network of contacts in various towns. The information that came back painted a grim picture. Silas was indeed as greedy and unscrupulous as Alara had described, known for preying on the vulnerable, for sharp dealings that often skirted the edge of the law, and for a vindictive temper when crossed. He was not a man to be trifled with, nor one to easily give up what he considered his due. Alara, meanwhile, tried to prepare herself for the inevitable confrontation. She had nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of Silas dragging her away, of the auction block, of losing her baby. Sometimes she would wake with a choked cry, her heart pounding. On more than one occasion, Ethan, his own sleep disturbed, would appear at her door, his face etched with concern in the lamplight. He wouldn't say much, just stand there, a steady, reassuring presence, until her trembling subsided. His quiet solidarity was a lifeline in the darkness. As the baby grew, they began to make tentative preparations. Alara, her skill with a needle proving invaluable, started sewing tiny garments from scraps of soft linen and flannel that Maria found for her. Ethan, in a moment of uncharacteristic awkwardness, returned from a trip to a larger trading post with a sturdy, simply made wooden cradle. He'd mumbled something about seeing it in a carpenter's shop and thinking it might be useful, his ears turning slightly red. Alara had accepted it with a soft smile, her heart touched by his gruff thoughtfulness. These shared activities, focused on the coming child, wove new threads of intimacy into the fabric of their unusual household. The gossip from Redemption, when Ethan's men went for supplies, continued, though it was now tinged with a new element of speculation. The news of a rich rancher harboring an auctioned pregnant woman was scandalous enough. The rumors that he was treating her with respect, almost as an equal, added fuel to the fire. Some were contemptuous, others merely curious. Ethan ignored it all, his demeanor in town unchangingly stern and aloof. This isolation, while at times oppressive, also served to strengthen the bond between him and Alara. They were, in a very real sense, alone together against a judgmental world. Ethan knew, however, that Silas Blackwood would not be content with sending letters. The man would come, and when he did, Ethan needed to be ready. He consulted with his foreman, Tom Riley, a grizzled, loyal man who had been with him for years. Tom, initially surprised by Ethan's decision to buy Alara, had come to respect her quiet dignity and Ethan's unwavering protection of her. "He'll bring trouble, Ethan, no doubt about it," Tom had said, his face grim. "A man like Blackwood, he thrives on intimidation." "I know," Ethan replied, "but he won't intimidate me, and he won't take her." The internal conflict for Ethan was considerable. He was a respected figure in the territory, a man whose word was his bond, whose reputation for fairness and integrity was hard-earned. Harboring Alara, especially with her past now a looming threat, was a risk. It could damage his standing, invite unwelcome scrutiny, even legal challenges if Silas was clever enough. He weighed his reputation, his carefully built life, against the fierce, protective loyalty he now felt for Alara and her unborn child. The choice, when he truly confronted it, was surprisingly clear. His integrity demanded he protect the innocent, regardless of the cost to his social standing. Samuel Vance's daughter deserved no less. And Alara, the woman she had become, deserved it even more. The ultimatum arrived not as a letter, but in person. One blustery afternoon, a rider approached the Maverick. It wasn't Silas himself, but a hired man, rough-looking and surly, who delivered a curt, verbal message. Silas Blackwood would arrive in Redemption in 1 week's time. He expected Ethan McCabe to deliver Alara and the sum of $1,000 to him there. If not, Blackwood would bring the full force of the law and whatever other forces he could muster down upon them both. He would see Alara charged as a runaway debtor and McCabe charged with harboring a fugitive and obstructing justice. The messenger delivered his threat with a sneer and rode off, leaving a pall of dread in his wake. Alara, who had witnessed the exchange from the kitchen window, felt a cold despair grip her. $1,000. It was an impossible sum, and the threat of legal action, however spurious, was terrifying. Silas was twisting the truth, painting her as the criminal. She found Ethan in his study, his face like a thundercloud. "I heard," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Ethan, you can't. You mustn't let him do this to you. Give me to him. It's the only way. I'll face him. I won't let him ruin you." Ethan slammed his fist down on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "Enough, Alara." His voice was harsh, but when he looked at her, she saw not anger, but a fierce, desperate protectiveness. "I told you, you are not facing him alone, and you are not going back to him. Ever." He paced the room, his mind working furiously. "He's trying to intimidate us, to force our hand. Redemption. He wants to make a public spectacle, to shame us both. But the law," Alara whispered. "If he has papers, false or not." Ethan stopped pacing. He looked at her, a new, resolute light dawning in his eyes. "There is one way," he said slowly, thoughtfully, "to shield you from his claims. One way to give you and your child a protection that even Silas Blackwood, for all his bluster, cannot easily overcome." Alara looked at him, confused, hope warring with fear. "What is it?" He walked towards her, stopping so close she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. He took her hands, his grip strong and steady. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I am asking you to marry me." Alara stared at him, dumbfounded. Marry him? The idea was so outlandish, so unexpected. It stole her breath. "Marry you?" she stammered. "But why? We barely... I mean, it's not for affection, Alara," he said, though a flicker in his eyes betrayed a deeper emotion he quickly suppressed. "Or at least that is not the primary reason. As my wife, you would be under my legal protection. Your child would bear my name, be my legal heir. Silas Blackwood's claims of indenture, of debt, would become much harder to enforce against Mrs. Ethan McCabe. His power over you would be significantly diminished, if not entirely broken." He saw the shock and confusion on her face. "Think about it, Alara. There's a practical solution. A shield. For you and for the baby," he paused. "I know it's unconventional, sudden, but Silas has forced our hand. We have little time." Alara's mind reeled. Marriage. To Ethan McCabe. A man who had saved her, sheltered her, shown her kindness she thought she'd never experience again. A man who remembered her as a girl, who respected her father. A man whose touch, when he'd felt her baby kick, had sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. It was a marriage of convenience, he was saying, a legal maneuver, but her heart, foolish and treacherous, fluttered with something more complex. She looked into his earnest, steady gaze. He was offering her not just safety, but a name, a place, a future for her child. He was offering to stand between her and the darkness of her past, to take her burdens as his own. "You would do that?" she whispered. "For me? For my child?" "I would," he said simply, his grip on her hands tightening almost imperceptibly. "The question is, Alara, will you do it? Will you marry me?" The weight of his proposal, the sheer audacity and unexpectedness of it, settled upon Alara. Marriage to Ethan McCabe. It was a lifeline, a fortress against Silas Blackwood's venomous pursuit. He presented it as a pragmatic arrangement, a shield for her and her child. Yet, looking into his steadfast gray eyes, she sensed depths of feeling he deliberately kept veiled. He spoke of protection, of legality, but his gaze held a warmth, a fierce possessiveness that went beyond mere duty. He was offering to share his name, his standing, his very life, to defy a man like Silas and the societal condemnation that would inevitably follow. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper, it's too much. I cannot ask you to sacrifice your reputation, your peace, for me. People will talk. Silas will make it ugly. The thought of him being sullied by her misfortune, by the scandal of her past, was a heavy burden. "Let them talk," Ethan said, his voice firm, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "My reputation can withstand a few whispers, and Silas Blackwood will find I am not so easily intimidated. What matters, Alara, is your safety and the safety of your child. This is the strongest defense we have." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "I know it's not what any young woman dreams of, a marriage born of necessity rather than other sentiments. But I would honor you, Alara. You would be mistress of the Maverick, in truth. And your child would want for nothing." Her mind raced. Silas's deadline was a ticking clock. The alternative, facing Silas alone, being dragged back into that nightmare, perhaps losing her child, was unthinkable. Ethan was offering her not just a reprieve, but a chance at a genuine, protected future. And in her heart, a secret, tentative bud of feeling for this strong, quiet man was already beginning to unfurl. He was more than a rescuer, he was becoming important. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with a newfound resolution. "If you are certain, Ethan, if you are truly willing to face what this will bring, then yes. Yes, I will marry you." A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost pain, crossed Ethan's face. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good," he said, his voice a little rough. "Then we have no time to lose. We'll ride to Green Valley Springs tomorrow. It's a day's journey, but there's a magistrate there who owes me a favor or two. We can be married quickly, quietly." "Quietly?" Alara echoed, a wry, sad smile touching her lips. "I doubt Silas Blackwood will allow anything about this to be quiet." "Perhaps not," Ethan conceded. "But we'll have the law on our side. His claims on an unmarried, runaway woman are one thing. His claims on my wife will be quite another." The decision made, a strange calm settled over Alara, overlaying the persistent tremor of fear. She was placing her entire future, and that of her child, into Ethan McCabe's hands. It was a monumental act of trust, yet somehow it felt right. He had already proven himself a man of his word, a man of honor. They made their preparations swiftly. Maria, when Ethan informed her of their intentions, simply nodded, her dark eyes filled with an understanding that transcended words. She embraced Alara warmly, whispering, "He is a good man, Mija. You will be safe with him." Her quiet approval was a comfort. The journey to Green Valley Springs was tense. Ethan pushed the horses hard, wanting to reach the town and secure the marriage license before Silas could somehow intervene or spread his poison ahead of them. Alara, despite the discomfort of the long ride in her advanced state of pregnancy, bore it with a stoic resolve. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts, the enormity of the step they were taking hanging heavy in the air. Green Valley Springs was larger and more established than Redemption, a bustling hub for the surrounding ranches and farms. As they rode down the main street towards the magistrate's office, Alara felt the familiar prickle of curious stares. News, especially scandalous news, traveled fast in the territories. She pulled her shawl tighter, her gaze fixed ahead, trying to project an outward calm she did not feel. Magistrate Thompson was an elderly, bespectacled man who greeted Ethan with a mixture of surprise and wary respect. When Ethan stated their purpose, the magistrate's eyebrows shot up. He looked from Ethan's resolute face to Alara's pale, pregnant form, and a troubled frown creased his brow. "McCabe," he said slowly, "this is highly irregular. I've heard rumors, of course, from Redemption, about this young woman. The rumors are mostly lies and distortions, spread by a man with a grievance and no honor," Ethan stated flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Alara Vance is a good woman who has suffered greatly. I intend to make her my wife, to offer her my name and my protection. All I require from you, Thompson, is to perform your duty." The magistrate hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "There could be complications, McCabe. If this Silas Blackwood has a legitimate claim." "His claim is based on coercion and fraud," Ethan cut in, his patience wearing thin. "And once she is Mrs. Ethan McCabe, his claim will hold no water. Are you going to marry us, Thompson, or must I find a preacher who will?" Just as the magistrate opened his mouth to reply, the door to his office burst open. Silas Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, his face contorted in a sneer of triumph. He was a portly man, dressed in clothes a little too fine for his coarse features, his small, piggish eyes glinting with malice. Behind him stood two rough-looking men, clearly hired muscle. "Well, well, well," Silas drawled, his voice oily and unpleasant. "What have we here? Trying to sneak away and legitimize your thievery, McCabe? And you, harlot!" He spat the word at Alara, who flinched as if struck. "Thought you could escape your honest debts, did you? Thought you could hide behind this cattle baron?" Ethan stepped protectively in front of Alara, his body a shield. "Blackwood," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you are not welcome here. State your business and be gone." "My business?" Silas chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "My business is her." He pointed a sausage-like finger at Alara. "She's mine, indentured to me and a debtor besides. Stole from my family's estate. She did, after my poor, sainted brother Thomas passed. And you, McCabe, are harboring stolen goods." A small crowd had begun to gather outside the magistrate's open door, drawn by the commotion. Whispers and murmurs rippled through them. Alara felt a wave of dizziness, the shame and fear threatening to overwhelm her. "He's lying," she cried, her voice trembling but clear. "He drove me from my home. He stole everything from me after Thomas died. He threatened me, sold my belongings. He's the thief, the monster." Silas laughed again. "Listen to her, the fallen woman, trying to slander an honest man. I have papers, magistrate, papers proving her indenture, her debts." He waved a sheaf of documents in the air. Magistrate Thompson looked increasingly alarmed. "Mr. McCabe, if he has legal documents." Ethan's gaze never left Silas. Those papers are forgeries or documents signed under duress. This man preyed on a grieving widow, stripped her of her dignity and her possessions, and then, when she fled his cruelty, had her thrown onto an auction block like she was no more than livestock. That is the truth of Silas Blackwood. He turned slightly, his voice carrying to the onlookers outside. This woman, Alara Vance, is the daughter of Samuel Vance, a man known for his honesty and kindness. Silas Blackwood destroyed her life out of pure greed. I bought her freedom from that auction, and now I intend to give her my name and my protection. Any man here who believes Blackwood's slime over the word of Ethan McCabe is welcome to step forward. A tense silence fell. Ethan's reputation in Green Valley Springs was solid. He was known as a hard man but a fair one. Silas Blackwood, on the other hand, exuded an aura of greasy malevolence. Then Alara, drawing strength from Ethan's unwavering stance, stepped out from behind him. Her eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion and fear, blazed with a desperate courage. She faced Silas, her voice shaking but firm. "You will not do this, Silas," she said, her gaze locking with his. "You will not destroy another life with your lies. I may have been weak and frightened before, but I am not alone now. Your cruelty ends here." She looked at the magistrate, then at the faces in the crowd. "My husband Thomas was a good man. Silas Blackwood dishonors his memory with every breath he takes. He hounded me, left me with nothing, threatened my unborn child. What Mr. McCabe says is the truth. I am not a debtor. I am a victim of this man's avarice." Her words, spoken with such quiet conviction and pain, had an impact. The murmurs in the crowd shifted, a note of sympathy creeping in. Silas's face flushed an ugly purple. His hired men shifted uneasily. Ethan put a supportive arm around Alara's shoulders. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes of his commitment, his solidarity. They stood together, a united front against the ugliness Silas represented. He felt her tremble, but also the steel in her spine. This was her fight too, and she was meeting it head-on. "Magistrate," Ethan said, his voice calm but steely, "we came here to be married. Are you going to let this vermin dictate the laws in your town? Or will you perform the ceremony?" Magistrate Thompson looked from Silas's furious face to Ethan's resolute one, then to Alara, whose quiet dignity in the face of such public humiliation was profoundly moving. He saw the way Ethan stood by her, a bulwark of strength. He made his decision. "Mr. Blackwood," the magistrate said, his voice gaining a new firmness, "your claims are serious, but so are Miss Vance's counterclaims. This is a matter for a higher court to untangle, perhaps. However, Miss Vance is a free woman in my jurisdiction, and Mr. McCabe is a respected citizen. If they wish to marry, I see no legal impediment to performing the ceremony. Your grievance with Miss Vance, or Mrs. McCabe as she will soon be, can be pursued through proper legal channels if you so choose. But you will not disrupt this proceeding further." Silas sputtered, his face contorted with rage. "You can't. I forbid it. She's mine. She is not a piece of property, Blackwood," Ethan said, his voice like ice. "She is a woman, and she will be my wife. Now, I suggest you and your associates leave, before you find yourselves charged with disturbing the peace." Ethan's hand drifted almost casually towards the Colt peacemaker holstered at his hip. His own ranch hands, who had accompanied them to town and had been waiting discreetly nearby, now moved a little closer, their expressions grim. Silas Blackwood looked at Ethan's unyielding face, at the magistrate's newfound resolve, at the unsympathetic eyes of the crowd, and at Ethan's formidable-looking men. His bluster began to crumble. He knew when he was outmatched, at least for the moment. He shot Alara a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over, you whore," he hissed. "And you, McCabe, you'll regret this day." With a final, venomous glare, Silas turned and stormed out, his hired thugs trailing sullenly behind him. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the magistrate's office. Magistrate Thompson cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Well then, Mr. McCabe, Miss Vance, if you're still of a mind?" Ethan turned to Alara, his expression softening as he looked down at her. "Alara?" She met his gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with a dawning hope. She nodded, a watery smile touching her lips. "Yes, Ethan. I am." The marriage ceremony was brief, simple, conducted in the dusty office with Maria and Tom Riley as witnesses, and a few curious but now respectful townspeople looking on from the doorway. The words spoken were the standard legal pronouncements, yet for Alara and Ethan, they carried a profound weight. When Magistrate Thompson pronounced them man and wife, Ethan turned to Alara. He didn't kiss her, not there, not then, but he took her hand, his fingers closing warmly, protectively, around hers. "Mrs. McCabe," he said softly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Mr. McCabe," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Their bond, forged in desperation and sealed in defiance, was now a legal reality. They had faced down shame, fear, and societal condemnation, and they had chosen each other. The auction, the flight, the terror of Silas Blackwood, it was all part of their story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. A new one had just begun. The ride back to the Maverick was imbued with a quiet solemnity. Alara, now Mrs. Ethan McCabe, sat beside her husband on the wagon seat, a profound sense of exhaustion and an equally profound relief washing over her. The confrontation with Silas had been terrifying, but standing beside Ethan, hearing him defend her, feeling his unwavering support, had kindled a strength in her she hadn't known she possessed. He had not only given her his name, he had given her back her voice. As the familiar silhouette of the Maverick's main house came into view against the twilight sky, Ethan reined in the horses. He turned to her, his face unreadable in the fading light. "Are you all right, Alara?" She met his gaze, a genuine, if tired, smile gracing her lips. "I am, Ethan." "More than all right," she hesitated, then reached out and placed her hand over his on the reins. "Thank you. For everything." He covered her hand with his other, his touch warm and firm. "There's no need for thanks between us, Alara." His thumb brushed gently against her knuckles. He helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the new intimacy, the new reality that now existed between them. News of the marriage, and of Silas Blackwood's public humiliation, spread like wildfire. On Ethan's next trip to Green Valley Springs for supplies a week later, he noticed a subtle shift. The curious stares were still there, but they were mingled with a newfound respect. Magistrate Thompson offered a gruff nod of approval. One or two prominent townswomen, who had previously been cool, offered polite greetings to Mr. McCabe. It was a small thing, but it signaled a grudging acceptance, a recognition that Ethan McCabe had stood by his choice, and that perhaps there was more to his new wife than malicious gossip had allowed. Back at the Maverick, life settled into a new, deeper rhythm. Alara was no longer just a guest, a recipient of Ethan's charity. She was the mistress of the ranch, and she slowly, tentatively, began to inhabit that role. Maria, delighted, deferred to her in matters of the household. Alara found a quiet satisfaction in bringing order and a touch of warmth to the bachelor austerity of the house. She planted flowers in the neglected window boxes, aired out rooms that had been closed off for years, and ensured the meals were not just plentiful but also thoughtfully prepared. The house began to feel less like Ethan's stark fortress and more like a shared home. Her confidence grew. She moved with a new grace, her steps lighter, the shadows of fear in her eyes receding. She was still Alara, the woman who had endured so much, but now she was also Mrs. Ethan McCabe, a woman with a place, a purpose, and a husband who, in his own quiet way, cherished her. Several weeks later, as the first hints of autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and russet, Alara's time came. The labor was long and difficult, but Maria was a calm, experienced presence, and Ethan, though outwardly stoic, never strayed far, his anxiety a palpable force in the house. Finally, in the deep quiet of the night, a new cry echoed through the maverick. A healthy baby boy, strong-limbed and lusty-lunged, was born. Maria cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket, placing him in Alara's waiting arms. Alara gazed down at her son, her heart overflowing with a love so fierce, so profound, it took her breath away. He was perfect, a tiny miracle, the culmination of all her hopes and fears. Ethan entered the room quietly, his face etched with fatigue and an emotion Alara couldn't quite decipher. He walked to the bedside and looked down at the child nestled in Alara's arms. "A son," Alara whispered, her eyes shining up at him. "We have a son, Ethan." He reached out a hesitant finger and gently touched the baby's downy cheek. A slow smile, rare and incredibly tender, spread across Ethan's face, transforming his usually stern features. He's strong," Ethan said, his voice thick with an unfamiliar emotion. He looked from the child to Alara, and his gaze was filled with a raw vulnerability, a deep, unguarded affection that made her heart ache. In that moment, all pretense of a marriage of mere convenience fell away. What had begun as an act of desperate protection, a shield against a cruel world, had blossomed into something rich and true. The birth of their son solidified their bond, weaving their lives together in an unbreakable thread of shared love and responsibility. Ethan was a father in every sense of the word, his initial awkwardness with the infant quickly replaced by a fierce, tender pride. Months passed. The winter snows blanketed the valley, and the maverick became a haven of warmth and quiet joy. One crisp morning, Alara sat by the fire in the living room, nursing her son, young Samuel Thomas McCabe, humming a soft lullaby. The room, once so stark, now bore the hallmarks of a lived-in, loved home, a colorful quilt draped over the sofa, a vase of dried wildflowers on the mantel, tiny knitted baby booties warming by the hearth. Ethan came in from the cold, stamping the snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy. He paused in the doorway, his gaze falling on Alara and their child. A profound sense of peace, of rightness, settled over him. He had faced down gossip, defied a dangerous man, and risked his reputation, all for the woman who now sat serenely before him, the mother of his son. He had never made a better bargain in his life. He walked towards them, shedding his heavy coat. Alara looked up, her smile soft and welcoming, a reflection of the love that now flowed freely and unspokenly between them. He knelt beside her chair, his calloused hand gently touching the baby's cheek. Then his gaze met Alara's, warm and steadfast. In the quiet strength of that look, she knew the auction had not defined her end, but, through him and the improbable love they had found, had become her most cherished beginning. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion overcoming prejudice and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. What part of their journey against prejudice touched you the most? Let us know below.